All right, perfect. All right, we have looks like good group of 20 so far. I know a few people are going to filter in as well. Welcome to I think it's our eighth or ninth virtual happy hours of the Florida Rum Society. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm very thrilled that both Richard and Gayle agreed to be our special guests this afternoon. So thank you guys for joining us. And without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to you guys. And I think everyone knows who you are, but if you want to introduce yourselves real quick, and then we'll start talking Barbados rum. Take it away, Richard. It's all you.
Is that me?
That's you.
Or Gail is there, but she's muted. So if she's talking, maybe.
Oh, I think she's trying to get anything. Well, you don't get much out of me. I'm sure everyone knows who I am. Or if not, you'll just have to catch up fast.
Can you give us the 2-minute? I know that you could go on forever, right? The 2-minute history of Foursquare in Barbados.
Yeah, okay, well that's better. I can talk about Foursquare. Yeah, so okay. So there's two histories really. It's my family and Foursquare's history. And we joined together in '94 when we buy Foursquare, which will get back running in rum in '96. So I'll give you the shorter history first, which is my family. So when I'm talking to an American audience, it's a little less familiar. In our sort of spirit making culture, similar to Scotch whiskey, distiller and bottler were separate. And that's kind of blurred now, so you maybe don't know it so much. But when you think of all the famous whiskey brands, Johnny Walker, and there was a Mr. John Walker, and there was a Mr. Dewar's, and there was a Mr. Ballantyne's, and these were all separate brands by buying rum and blending. I was actually reading a recent article from Dave Broom, which suggests that actually they learned blending techniques from initially working with rums, but that's another story. And if you go on the other side, you can see it in Barbados with names like my great grandfather, R.L. Seale, or Martin Dorley, who was a contemporary of my great grandfather. And you can also see it over in Jamaica. Very famous name you guys know as J. Ray and his nephew. They started out as blenders. Another very famous name that you would know from Jamaica, not as famous today as it used to be once upon a time, Fred Myers. And there are many of these that have long gone in Barbados. And we actually in Barbados bottled several old labels from old blenders, ESA Field, Ali Arthur, these long lost. And these merchant blenders, you have to understand, very much like Scotland, these were food. These were traders. So you couldn't survive back in those days selling one product. So some of them were very wine and spirit dominated. So like Martin Dorley was a big importer of wines and spirits, as well as blending and bottling their own rums. Fred Myers was a gigantic company in sort of back in the day, and so they would buy rum. So that's why so as they say in the English culture, distillery and blender were separate, and you didn't really have many distillery brands. Or didn't have distillery brands at all, which is why you have a scenario where a lot of people don't realize, for example, that most of those single malt brands are all relatively new. First single malt brand is 1964. And the first time Appleton appears as a brand, I think, is the 1940s or 1950s. even though the distillery's been there, since the 1700s. And that's why you have like recently Hamden, first time Hamden has a brand. Why? Because it's a distiller. And so that's our history is that starts in the 1920s. And we acquire Foursquare, which is shut as a sugar factory in the 1980s. And if you go back far enough in Barbados, 1700s through most of the 1800s, every estate made sugar, molasses, and rum. And there's a great loss of this because there's great changes that happened to the industry at the late end in the 19th century. Centralization, beet sugar crisis, blah, 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 blah. There's some very specific changes that occur in Barbados. And most of the estates that make rum disappear from making rum. The one that does survive is well known to everyone, which is Mangay. But there were several others. Go back 100 years, there's a few others. So Foursquare has actually got an interesting history because Foursquare is an individual estate of which there were many hundreds, but up to the turn of the century, there were about 430 individual estates in Barbados. And all of these estates made sugar, molasses, and rum. Although by 1900, most of them didn't make rum anymore. But sort of, if you go back about mid-1800s, about nearly 500 estates, and they're all making sugar, molasses, and rum. And we go through this big crisis at the turn of the century. And what happens by the 1920s is we create centralization. And so that's where sugar estates don't grind their cane anymore. They send it to central sugar factories. And Foursquare, being one of the larger estates and one of the first estates to convert to steam, becomes one of these central sugar factories. So Foursquare is first an individual estate, then it becomes a central factory cut off from Foursquare estate. And spends most of the 20th century as a central sugar factory. So milling cane from all around. Closes in 1980. So it's one of the last sugar factories to close in Barbados. So in the 30s, there were about, I think, 33 central factories making vacuum pan sugar. 33 by the 60s, there were 14. By the 70s, there were 10. There's now one. So Foursquare is one of the last to close. And we, as they say, purchased it as a shuttered sugar factory in 94. Why? Because all of the great reasons why it was a great estate and a great sugar factory apply to being a rum distillery. One of the main reasons is on an excellent source of water. See, good cane and all the rest of it. And so that's one of the reasons for resurrecting Foursquare. And so that's where the Seale family and the Foursquare family join. And then, even though we have these wonderful old brands like Martin Dorley, we then launch a Foursquare brand. So that's why, as they say, a lot of people don't realize, but some of these distillery brands, whereas in American culture, obviously distillery and brand are synonymous, so in bourbon whiskey, whereas in the sort of English culture, they were separate. But now that's blurred. So as you say, you have, and just to give you a similar scenario, a very analogous situation in Jamaica, J. Ray and Nephew, they purchased Appleton Estate in 1917. Of course, that was a working distillery. We purchased a closed one, but it's the same kind of principle of a blending tradition by an estate. And this also happened with Nicholas Abbey. So Larry Warren purchased Nicholas Abbey. Again, very, very old estate in Barbados, goes right back to the mid 1600s. And stopped making rum sometime in the late 1800s. So he purchased the estate, refurbishes it, brings back rum making back there sometime. And So one of the wonderful things that's currently happening right now is Mount Gay has purchased the estate around them as they would have been. So they've sort of rejoined what would have been one estate, many, many years ago. So they're growing their own cane. Obviously, Nicholas grows their own cane. And we do a bit of milling, not our own cane yet, but nearby estate. And so it's quite amusing how 100 years things are coming back a little bit full circle, and the rum is moving, and the estate traditions are being revived a little bit.
Everyone's moving back to the grow your own stuff and do it all right there.
Yeah.
Are you guys looking to do that, to grow your own stuff?
Yeah. Well, we just to sort of confuse you even further. So I talk about separation of distillery and estate. Well, when they had central factories, they separated the factories from their estates. So all the historic central factories were on historic estates, but they got separated. So Foursquare factory became separated from Foursquare estate. And this is way back in like the 40s. And so we purchased Foursquare factory. So we're surrounded by Foursquare estate, which is not owned by us.
Got it.
Having said that, we, over the years, acquired more and more space from them, more and more land from them. And we, at this point in time, do own some land in Cane. Again, we have owned in the past. So in theory, we could potentially use our estate cane, but we currently use cane from Nicholas. So let me take a step back. We basically have 4 sources of raw material. We have imported molasses, which comes from the region. We have local Barbados molasses. So that local Barbados molasses will be supplied from all the remaining estates in Barbados. They all go to the one remaining central sugar factory, and the local molasses then comes out to the various distilleries that are left. So we take that. Then Nicholas, we have a very wonderful synergistic relationship with Nicholas. Larry wants to run the mill quite regularly because one of his core activities is as a tourist attraction. So he runs the mill, but he can run the mill more than rum he needs. So guess who takes the juice?
Worked out well.
Yes, so we're very happy. He gives me a good deal. Tourists get to see the mill working, the wonderful old mill working, and I get some fresh juice. Because the thing about Barbados is that it's very small. So, when I say I get some cane from Nicholas right up in the north of the island, that sounds like I'm getting from a different estate. But when you think of, it's like, less than 20 miles away. It's about, like 12 miles. So in a typical estate, it would be, on the estate. But anyway, so I get from them, and then I get from another really close estate, one in the middle of the island called Ashbury. And the reason why I get that is that most of the cane in Barbados is machine cut, and Ashbury is one of the few that do hand cut. So that's my 4 sources of raw material: imported molasses, local molasses, juice from Nicholas Abbey, and my own juice, which comes from another estate. So we physically don't get. We do get something from Foursquare because our cane goes to the central factory. So in theory, some of the molasses coming back has some Foursquare cane in it, but it's it's
terroir,
it's in there somewhere.
Is the terroir as important, like say as wine, like different sides of a mountain, or like the different terrain? Is that as important in the growth of sugarcane as wine?
No, yes and no. The thing to understand about terroir is it's really a cultural answer. And so in rum making, it's about where you emphasize, when you produce a product, the things that drive the attributes of that product are going to be different in different processes, and it depends where you emphasize. Sometimes the way I like to sort of illustrate the thing is that you could take a set of Guyana molasses. And I think the first thing to realize that in the region, the molasses actually doesn't vary that much, and there's very good reasons for that. Similar varieties of cane, similar factory processes. Again, we're separate islands, but in the grand scheme of things, we're actually not that far apart. So you could take a set of Guyana molasses and drop off a set at, Worthy Park in Jamaica, and drop off a set at Foursquare, and I guarantee you, they will turn it into Jamaican rum, and it will be, hey, this is Jamaican rum, and I guarantee you, I will turn it into Barbados rum. So it's not that the terroir doesn't matter. It's just a question of what are the important elements of the, what are the attributes that drive that particular rum. I mean, if you nip over to Martinique, for example, the way they're running, because they're using fresh juice, and they're using, it's a fairly sort of common distillation method, the Creole column distillation method. They are very raw material driven. So they're very, very sensitive to their inputs. So if you go and you ask them, well, what about your, terroir? Well, yeah, because they're very sensitive. Whereas when you come over to us, what's happening with us is that because we're using pot stills, because we're using column stills, high rectification column stills, we can adjust out some of those nuances. And then, of course, the way we age and stuff like that. So it's really about where press is. So when you're talking about wine, because you're talking about AOCs, and you're talking about very common processes after the harvesting of the grape, well, obviously, again, those little nuances come out. So it becomes very important whether, it came from this vineyard or that vineyard. Whereas, our rums are a sum of multiple inputs, and it all depends which input can influence. Something that I like to explain it a little bit with the yeast. If you go to American whiskey distiller and you ask about yeast, they'll tell you, yeah, yeast is absolutely vital. And you go, it's changed a little bit recently, but typically if you went to a sort of Scotch whiskey distiller years ago and you said yeast, they would be like, wow, what's the big deal with yeast? And so if you come to me, I'll be like, yeast? Oh, what are you so excited about yeast for? And it's not that one's wrong and one's right. It's just about culture. So what happens in American whiskey distillery, you got to understand what's happening with the culture. He's got some control over his mash bill. So, there's a limitation of what's happening there. He's doing one type of distillation. He has to use new wood, and only one type of new wood. And and the aging is relatively short in the grand scheme. So you tell an American distillery he can use different yeasts, it's just magic. But if you go to rum, or you go to Scotland and you go, well, shit, we can use column still, pot still, any kind of blend in between. We can use new wood, refill wood, sherry wood, port wood, Madeira wood. We can age, 5 years, 20 years, old cask, new cask. Well, yeah, guess what? We don't get so excited about yeast. So it's just different culture. It's not one's wrong or one's right. It's just where you emphasize the components that make your product. And I didn't even mention, like in rum, we'll use a lot of different fermentation recipes. That's the other thing that's I think one of the things that's different about rum as well is that and again it's kind of an interesting result of changes over the years. And again, I don't want to sort of underestimate the industries that I'm not so involved in, but when you visit a rum distillery, the one thing about a rum distillery is any rum distillery is generally, because of the history of estates being lost and consolidated, we have a history of making many different rums in one distillery. So whereas when you look at, like single malt distillery or American rum distillery, they're not putting out as wide a range of products as we are. And I don't mean brands, I mean literally recipes and form and styles of rum. So, people will ask me, like, can I get a single cask Foursquare or a single cask, Real McCoy? And I say, such a thing doesn't exist. There's no one cask that, you go and empty, because the rums are some of blends of very different rums blended together. So there's no single one cask that you can find that particular product in. And I think that's one of the things that's different with rum as well.
I know John. I think John, did you have a question you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was gonna say, Richard, what do you think, or Gayle, maybe you want to answer too, is I'm curious to know both of your opinion on, for Barbados rum, and speaking about culture, what do you think is the most influential element that is for rum for Barbados? Is it the molasses? Is it the cask selection? What is it that makes Barbados rum Barbados rum?
Yeah, I think I better answer that one. She comes from Canada.
Y'all's answer first, and then you get answer.
Well,
For me, I'd say I think our water is really important, because Barbados water you can only get it in Barbados. You can't get it anywhere else. But I'm gonna let Richard answer. But for me, I think the water has a lot to, but it's the whole of everything. Foursquare is completely different to Mount Gay. It's completely different to St. Nicholas Abbey. I'm gonna leave that one to Richard. I know when I'm out of my zone, but I'm gonna put my 2 cents.
Well, I think the first thing to realize is how substantial that is. So I actually, there's a magazine with a quote from me in, I suppose I might not be completely out of line by giving you the quote here. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on. It's a pretty cool quote. So my quote was, the diversity we see in rum is tied to our social and economic history. It reflects incredible ingenuity in changing circumstances. And then I actually go on, it's talking about rules and stuff. And so I go on to say, if you want a category with no standards, go with vodka. It can be made from anything and taste like nothing. And so what I was saying there basically is that in rum, you can go and pull a Jamaican rum and a Barbados rum or Martinique rum, and you're going to see these substantial differences. And it's really quite remarkable. So that's the first thing I'm saying is, look at the ingenuity here, that all three of us start with sugarcane. And the sugarcane are not that far apart. In other words, terroir does not answer this question, which is why I gave that point. You could drop the molasses off in Barbados and Jamaica, and boom, they're going to come out with these two different styles of rum. So terroir does not explain why Barbados, Jamaica, and Martinique rum taste the same. It's a piece of it, but it's a very small piece of it. Terroir is limited directly to talking about the soil. So you have this remarkable diversity. And sometimes this is very often mischaracterized. One of the most frustrating things, the way this is mischaracterized is, well, rum didn't have any rules, so we were allowed to be really, really creative. This is total bullshit. Because first of all, nobody had any rules till about 1908. That's when the first time they start, because this is a neat era. One of the commercial era is sort of late 19th century, and of course, once you get the commercial era, you get all the frauds and the imitation and all that. And so this is the first era in which we're having food safety legislation and identities and protections and all these things. So for the first 300 years of spirit making, nobody has any restrictions. So it's got nothing to do with that at all. And in fact, to the opposite, rum, we tend to think of rum as all spirits as a manufactured product or an industrial product. Rum is very much an agricultural product. So, it's the estates, maintain traditions over years and years and years, and things change very slowly. So the reasons for the diversity for me are actually much, much more interesting. So people talk about, as they say, it sounds really good, especially the marketing, you know, oh, well, we're all very creative because we didn't have bureaucrats restricting. This is total garbage. It's really a reflection of the changes of economic circumstances. So one of the things that really shaped or made dramatic changes to rum was actually the beet sugar crisis. And the beet sugar crisis manifests itself in different ways. And also in the case of the French, the Haitian Revolution. So the Haitian Revolution triggers off the development of beet sugar because France doesn't want to buy sugar anymore from French West Indies. The development of the beet sugar triggers the development of central sugar factories. The development of central sugar factories is what creates the agricole producer. The guy left on his own, he can't send his cane to the central factory, so he has to turn his cane into rum. The beet sugar crisis is also what creates these sugar central factories, and it creates the pressure to produce in Barbados industrial type production, column stills, mass production. It's the same. Rum industrial, what we call rum industrial, means rum in a big column still, not on an estate. Grain whiskey is whiskey industrial. So the advent of grain whiskey influences the birth of blended Scotch whiskey. The advent of light column still rum influences the advent of blended rum. And Barbados goes this direction in the 20th century. So does Guyana. Jamaica comes much later. So the style of Barbados rum or Jamaica rum or Guyana rum is influenced by all these different economic factors. And it's also, I think, social factors as well. So Barbados is, you know, I think our style of rum kind of reflects our culture. And of course, I'm a little bit biased in that. I do think these things, I think these are all inputs. So I think the development of the different styles, they say, is a very, very interesting question. And the elements are far more interesting than is appreciated, these social and economic developments. And I think there's tremendous, as I say, tremendous ingenuity in responding to these different challenges that are thrown at them. I mean, for example, the agricole producer. The agricole producer copes with the fact that he cannot send his cane to the sugar factory by producing something hitherto not produced before, 100% cane juice rum. So it's and then it also leads to consequences, because if you make a fresh cane juice rum, you need the continuous distillation, which is a technology also arriving at a time because you need to distill very quickly. So, you know, a lot of people think that a Martinique rum tastes the way it does because it's from fresh cane juice. No, that's one piece of it. It's because it's fresh from cane juice, and it's because it's the Creole column, and it's all these little bits and pieces. And you have to take a step back and realize that rum is two things that we don't understand so well today. One, rum is a commodity. So economics is a huge, huge factor. And two, rum is an agricultural product, not an industrial manufactured product. And today we're so far away from those two things because we think of rum as this branded product. So we think of a rum being created by, you know, marketeers, and it's really was created as a commodity and sold as a commodity. And we tend to think of it as a manufactured product rather than understanding that it has this very, very strong link to agriculture. So that's why something like agricole could be born. And that's why something like blended Barbados rum could be born, because blended Barbados rum was this sort of combo of estate pot still rum and industrial column still rum, just like blended Scotch whiskey. But you don't see it in that context, but that's the real historical reality.
So like, can you take me back to like where you were maybe when you decided that, you know, all these different paths you can go to in rum, obviously you guys had imported, you had experience, but at some point you decided that you had to make a better rum than anybody else. Can you kind of take me back to like what led you down to that path?
I actually think I was more driven slightly differently. My mission has always been to, it's not about making a better rum than anyone else. My mission has always been convincing people that rum is the best spirit on the planet.
Yeah, but making really good rum helps.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's the motivation. The motivation has never been, you know, my colleagues over in other distilleries.
Or pursuit of perfection in a way, I guess.
Well, I wouldn't say. I mean, getting back to this whole point about diversity, one of the most important objectives is to make the rum in the correct style. So it's very trite to make something different. That's trivial. What's the greater challenge is to make something very, very good, but the person recognizes that it's Foursquare, the person recognizes that it's Barbados. You know, when I was back in Miami earlier this year and Joy was speaking, and she made a wonderful point about how that Jamaica rum has the greatest diversity. And she's right. It's in terms of the range of them. So we all, as I mentioned before, all distilleries make different rums, but they probably have the widest range of different marks. But here's the key. The key is you can have all those different marks and you'll recognize every single one of them as Jamaican. You'll pick up a Hamden, which of course is the sum of many marks, and you'll pick up a Hamden, and the Hamden tastes very, very different to the Worthy Park, and the Worthy Park tastes very, very different to the Appleton, but you're going to go Jamaican, Jamaican, Jamaican. And it's the same thing with Barbados. It's very important that you pick up a Barbados rum and you recognize your Barbados. It's very important that you pick up, to me, a Nobility or a Criterion, you know, or a Dominus, and you go, they're different, but they're also the same. This is very, very important. So, yeah, it's one thing to say, well, I want to make the best rum, but it's also I want to make the best Barbados rum. I want to make the best Foursquare rum. So that's a very, very important. I cannot underestimate that. And then, as I say, my mission has always been much more about breaking this sort of image of being a second-rate product. Because this is really only a very modern image. As you say, go back far enough, and everyone's drinking rum. Rum's the famous spirit of the Caribbean, but also it's more of a commodity, and you know it's not. You know, the 20th century, particularly the latter half of the 20th century, has not been good for rum. You know, sort of advent of rum and Coca-Cola, and all the investment in branding of all the other categories. And so you're sort of left, so the average person in the last 10, 20, 30 years is left with an impression of rum that's shaped by icons in a category like, you know, Captain Morgan and dare even say Bacardi. And the sad thing for me with Bacardi is you go back, you know, to the 1930s or the 20s, Bacardi's quite a prestige brand. Same thing with a brand like Myers. You go back, you know, through the 19th century, because I think Myers was, I think, starting 1860s or 70s, something like this. But you go through Myers, 1920s, 1930s, you're talking about a very, very prestigious brand, made wonderful, wonderful old rums. And, you know, you kind of look at Myers today, and it's kind of a sort of bottom shelf mixing rum, it's a term of which I hate. And so you have these icons. I mean, the one icon that has stayed really above the fray and done a great job of keeping the quality up, of course, is Appleton. But you have all these icons. So they shape the category as being, you know, I mean, one of the worst questions I hate, people pose it to me all the time, you know, when's rum going to premiumize? And I hate it because the implication is that we're this poor spirit, and we're now for the first time going to make a premium version. And this, of course, is bullshit. We've been making aged rums. You know, you can go back in the 19th century and find records and prizes being won by 20 and 30-year-old rums and all of this. So I'm sorry, but we've been premiumizing long before most spirit categories. But if your image of rum has been shaped by, you know, Captain Morgan spiced, And, you know, even worse, sometimes you see it in, you know, publications will publish, you know, world's 10 leading, you know, rum brands, and they'll list stuff from Far East, India and stuff, which wouldn't qualify as a rum. They won't do that with whiskey because they know those products are not whiskey, but they'll do it with rum. And so you'll hear something like, you know, world's leading rum is McDowell's or something, and it's just flavored neutral spirit. It's not rum, right? Okay. So none of that helps. So my mission has always been to, you know, come into the whiskey crowd or brandy crowd and shake things up.
Which I feel like, that's sort of the mission of this group of people, right? Is to be like, there's more to the world. And I've had plenty of people who have asked to be a part of our Facebook group or whatever, and I always ask them what their favorite rum is. And I've had plenty of people be like, Captain Morgan. And I'm like, why don't you come in? Hopefully we can teach you something and see that there's so much more to the world of rum out there. So I feel like,
I mean, I hear you, but don't forget, my general response to that is that you know, someone says I'm drinking Captain Morgan, they're not my audience, so I don't worry about it.
sure.
So, you know, my more mission is to make people understand that's a different category.
Exactly.
And this is why, you know, people talk about, you know, we hear nonsense things like, well, rum, you know, comes from all these different countries and has all these different rules. Well, so does Scotch whiskey. I'm sorry, not Scotch, sorry, that I'm making the same mistake. So does whiskey. Whiskey comes from different countries and has different rules.
Mm-hmm.
Rum is no different.
Mm-hmm.
However, what you do is you automatically give a preeminence to, so if I say whiskey, you think America, you think Scotland, you think Japan, you know, you may even think Canada, a stretch. But you know, someone said to you, well, you know, here's some whiskey from the Philippines. You might go, well, I don't know if that's whiskey. Whereas, you know, someone can bring you rum from who knows where, and you're like, oh, wow, interesting rum. And it's the same principles apply. Barbados and Jamaica are like Scotland and Ireland to whiskey, you know, what we are to rum. It's the same principles. We're the old producers, the traditional producers. And, you know, one of the reasons why I do the things I do is because you can't do everything as a brand. And the best way for me to explain that is to kind of look at the reverse. If you have a bourbon brand or you have a Scotch whiskey brand and you're very successful, you could not have done that success without the help of the image of the category. As much as you might like to believe you're a genius, but you couldn't. You simply couldn't. Take any Scotch whiskey brand, any bourbon brand, you cannot. Whatever you sell, there's a big chunk of that because you live in that category. If you had just created that same brand and you couldn't write bourbon on it or you couldn't write Scotch on it and it tasted just as good, I'm sorry, you probably wouldn't even sell not even a third of what you do. So the category has to be right. And, you know, it's, again, as I say, the same principles. When you look at the oldest and traditional producers, no, I'm sorry, we don't mess around with flavorings and sugars and dodgy age statements and all the rest of it. You know, for 100 years, Jamaica has been famous for 200 years exporting rum. Barbados used to be famous many, many years back. You know, and they were famous on the same basis in which, you know, Scotch whiskey was famous or cognac was famous. And so we need to make sure that people understand that distinction and don't think that, oh, well, here we have this brand. I don't know if you guys saw the recent Forbes article. So on a certain brand, and it comes out and it explains how in, you know, Dom Rat, they can use, it's illegal to use average age, blah, 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 blah. None of that's actually relevant because it's not legal in America. So this is the thing that people don't grasp. They say, oh, well, this rum comes from different countries and different rules. Well, guess what? When it's sold in America, there's only one rule applies, the American rule. But that's also part of the problem, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to take all the rum from all these different countries and put them under one rule. You don't do that in the other categories. You sell bourbon whiskey on the bourbon rules. You sell Scotch whiskey on the Scotch rules. So what we want to happen in America is we want Jamaican rum on the Jamaican rules. We want Barbados rum on the Barbados rules. So what you're actually complaining about, we want to happen. We want the different countries' rules recognized, but the proper ones. And of course, someone's saying to me, well, what are the proper ones? And how dare you say you're the proper one? Well, I'm sorry, but we have the heritage. So, telling me, well, this country has an average age and they've been making rum from the 1950s. Well, good for that. But I'm sorry. And there are also certain things where it will bring the whole edifice down. So, yes, you recognize Scotch whiskey rules and you recognize bourbon rules, but there's nothing in there that's inherently conflicting. So if I say to you recognize Barbados rules and recognize Jamaican rules, there's nothing in there inherently conflicting. But if you turn around and then say, okay, well, I'm going to recognize the Central American countries' rules, and in there, they allow them to put random numbers on the label. Well, I'm sorry, that's inherently conflicting. So, you don't go, the TTB doesn't recognize every whiskey from everywhere in the world, but it does recognize Irish whiskey and Scotch whiskey. And the same principle needs to arrive in rum. You may have one sort of base standard, but you need to recognize that there's a Barbados rum and a Jamaican rum, and these have higher standards. They're made to higher standards, and you need to recognize these standards and protect these standards. So then the consumer now can rely on it the same way they rely on anything else. If you buy a bottle of cognac in America, you get it made to the rules of the BNIC, good or bad. But you can buy a bottle of rum labeled agricole in the US that does not meet the standards of agricole.
I think you're right to segment like your target consumer as like the bourbon drinker. I know when I opened my liquor store 10 years ago, it was all about who had the best vodka, and it was all based on, brand prestige marketing. Whereas the whiskey drinker right now, they really research where their product comes from. Also, you have the ambiguity from all these things made from Midwest grain distillers. But all these people are really dialing in what they like about the whiskey they're actually drinking. So I'm impressed with that consumer base. But they're also getting tired of paying inflated prices for what's their allocated items that they can never get. So I think you're 100% spot on to take that educated consumer. They switch over to a premium rum and they get it and they love it.
Yes, I mean, as you say, and in a sense, rum, what you do see from rum, and it's naturally very attractive, you can see, and I used to talk about this a lot, you can see certain rums going what I call the vodka route, where we create value not through substance. We create value through the image. So the value is not, it's built on a house of sand, which is vodka. Vodka's, a brand's value in vodka is totally related to the attributes of the brand, not the product in the bottle. Whereas when you look at a bourbon whiskey or a Scotch whiskey or a good cognac, it's actually related to the specific attributes. So, when you pay top dollar for, an 18-year-old Glenfiddich, it's because it's 18 years old. When you pay top dollar for a vodka, it's because they have created an illusion that it is valuable. There's nothing of extra value actually in there. And that was my concern with the rum, and it still remains a concern. And that's why we don't go in that audience. So there's a lot of rums out there that the intrinsic value of the rum is poor. It's based on the fancy package, sugar sweet taste, and as I say, an illusion for an age. And that's the vodka route, where the value is created not by anything of substance. It's pure illusion. And it may be illusion on age. So you might be picking up a product that says 18 or 23 on it and paying whatever the price is on the illusion that you're buying an 18-year-old product. And you're not. You're buying a product that has a decorative number of 18 or 23 on it. We know one brand that since the TTB tightened up things, dropped the word year and put the word reserver. Well, there you go. If If you haven't realized you've been duped till now, with that change, I can't help you any further. But that's a different category. And I always say to people, it's all about price. If a product's $20 or whatever, I don't give a shit what's on the label. They could write 25. You know what I mean? If it's 20, if it's cheap, it doesn't matter. And create all the illusions they want. But when
Well,
you
Richard,
start
another driver of value in addition to perceived value is scarcity, right? And so I'm curious about the decision because, if I go pick up a Macallan 18, in the Scotch world, I have no idea what year that was produced, right? A Macallan 18 that I pick up this year versus Macallan 18 that my dad's got sitting on his office desk tastes the same. You made a really strategic and interesting decision when you started vintaging your rums. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, what we did there was, so with the ECS series, what we did there, and yes, you're right. In other words, I think your point about scarcity, I think that's actually really underappreciated. I don't think, as I say by the layman, I don't think people understand it. Once you have an aged product, there's a finite quantity. Doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're a Diageo, you've probably planned, tens and thousands of barrels, but whatever it is, you can't make tomorrow some more 18-year-old rum. So that's why I say age statements are very, very important. As you go up in price, you need to have some, and it doesn't have to be an age statement. It might be a very creditable brand, that whatever, but you have to have some substantive belief that there's, why this is cost much. And of course, that the whole rarity is then what drives the secondary market and the allocations and all the rest of it. Because a lot of that did start very genuine. When I do a vintage release and I have a certain quantity, it's a certain quantity. You come to Foursquare, and, we do have an impressive lot of stock, but in the grand world scheme of things, we're still pretty small. So, but coming back to your question with the vintages, what happened is we wanted to do special things, and kind of break out of that mold a little bit of that spirits mold where you produce a brand and the brand's very consistent and of course we do that, but we wanted to break a little away from that, and because we're small and we're nimble, so why play the game that the big brands will always kill you at, which is building brand equity and brand loyalty and all the rest of it. You can't match them. So be nimble. And the split between doing the vintages and, the name rums like Nobility and stuff is we consider the vintages to be core. So that's why the vintages are 100% ex-bourbon, for example, because if there's one thing we do day in, day out is ex-bourbon casks. So the vintages have been 11 or 12 years old because that's kind of what we consider at the heart of what we do. So that's what got the vintages. And then, yes, the beauty of doing the vintages is I actually can respond a little bit to you, to the consumer. So what I mean is that if I look, for example, at 1998, which went stupid money in a recent auction, which we released in 2008, people ask, well, what's it like and stuff, and they say, well, it's a very different style of rum, because in 2008 we were responding to a very different audience in terms of their exposure to rum. So they wanted very light, they wanted it very sweet. There's no sugar added, but it's just style. And it's 100% calm spirit. And if you love 2007, you'll probably be disappointed with 1998. It's a different audience. And so the beauty of doing vintages is you can respond and change as your audience changes. So the vintages are the way of, so let's say I instead of creating vintages, I create a brand or another line extension. Then you're sort of constrained to be like, okay, well, it's a brand now, and I got to be consistent to my followers of my brand. So, and we still obviously do that with things like RL Seale 10-year-old and Joyce 12, or to let the cat out of the bag. The evolution of those it's much slower. So I will tell you honestly, absolutely straight, the RL Seale 10-year-old tastes different today than it tasted 10 years ago. The evolution is slow. I have to do that in a very slower way so that you don't get upset.
one
But the
bottle.
beauty of the vintages is,
Intentionally, or
I can respond much more rapidly, and you know, and be a little provocative, and have a little fun because it's a small quantity. So I can push the vintage in a little bit different direction and see what the response is. You just, and because they're vintages and they're small, they're going to sell, but have some fun. In other words, when you guys sit there and tear your hair out comparing '07 and '08 and '05, believe me, I've done that on purpose.
And we're doing it in the chat, just so you know. We're already doing it right now.
I mean, I love to be deliberately provocative. That's why, like last year, I came out with 3 14-year-old sherry cask rums. This year, I come out with 3, 2 at 12, 1 at 14, 100% bourbons.
and next year?
I love to be a little bit provocative because, especially like one of the things I notice that happens, and you know, people do it genuine, but you know, you make rums to bourbon casks and people understand, you know, okay, Dorleys will taste different to Earl Seal, but as soon as you mention like a different cask, people think they all taste the same. So they're like, you know, people ask me, well, you know, like Sagassi's Madeira cask. So is that like Criterion, but just lower in strength? I'm like, no, they're 2 completely different rums. And so the sherry cask, we were like, I could see the sort of confusion in some people's faces. You know, you came up with Hereditas is 14-year-old in sherry cask. And Patrimonio is 14-year-old in sherry cask. And they're like, well, what's the difference then? You know, like, there's 2 completely different rums. And, you know, and then people would post, I'm comparing Emperor to Hereditas. Oh my God, they really are different. It's like, yes, they are. But that's deliberate because I want people to think, I want people to learn that a rum is more than a laundry list of parameters. Because one of the things I've noticed as well, and this is a sort of amusing to me a little bit, it's a little bit of a mischaracterization. So because I talk about things like age statements and all the rest of it, I get as kind of like, you know, sort of labeled as a sort of champion of transparency. No, I don't want to be known as a champion of transparency. I want to keep some things a mystery. You know, because that's the nature of the spirit game. What needs to be transparent are the important things. So, you know, if I'm charging $100 on something, you need to know the age because that's you know, it's important. And you know, the other thing that needs to be there is things that help you appreciate the product. So obviously, if I've aged it in sherry cask, I need to put that there. But I don't want people to think that I'm for this sort of laundry list that you can, because then people then start to think of a product in terms of this laundry list. And you know, I've had these discussions with Luca earlier, and like Luca came up with some rums and he put the congeners on it, and Luca was like, "Whoa, I want to put the congeners on the label." I was like, "Well, first of all, no, I don't want to put the congeners on, and 2, I have no idea what they are. So, you know, good luck, go and get them tested." But I never wanted to put any kind of number on a label, because once you do that, it's a little bit like the peat guys. You'll prejudice people and probably say, well, you know, I prefer Dominus because, you know, well, you know, it had 280 esters and Criterion only had 230. So obviously I prefer. And so you once you start putting numbers, and of course people also misinterpret numbers. Because they you know, things like, you know, fermentation time and distillation proof, you put these things on, but if people don't really understand them, you actually then misled people. I mean, one of the things that also amuses me, for example, is that, you know, come out with the ECS series. There's not a single finish amongst them, okay? But if I had $1 for every time someone said, you know, I tasted one of your finishes, or because we're so brainwashed into believing that as soon as you mention a wine barrel, 45 wine or wine, it must be in some kind of gimmicky finish. It's amazing.
I'm not saying the F word today.
Dorley's 12, okay, I have on that uses 12-year-old rums done in bourbon and Madeira, because we've been using Madeira for many years. It's one of our core barrels. And I write on the label, aged 12 years in American white oak. Absolutely true. And I've mentioned it to a few people that have used Madeira cask. And it then turns out, finished in Madeira cask, Doherty's 12-year-old. I even saw someone write, Doherty's 12-year-old finished in Madeira and port cask. I'm like, where the fuck did you get that from? So people ask me, well, why do you? I said, that's why, because sometimes you put something on a label and then people just run off. I mean, obviously I have to put it with ECS, but I'm amazed that because we're so conditioned on certain things, you write a wine barrel, people instantly think it's a finish, and it's not. But so sometimes that's what can be very frustrating with because the label is very small and you cramming a lot of information on there, and I don't want rums to be reduced to just this rum tastes this way because it has a sherry barrel. Well, no, guess what? I can do 3 completely different rums in sherry barrels. So I want people to really understand that you cannot just reduce a rum. And the attributes that you need to talk about are there to enhance your enjoyment of it. So if I write, you buy, sagacity, and you see X bourbon Madeira, that's there to help you appreciate what you're tasting. It's not there for you to pigeonhole and categorize it and say, well, that's what a Madeira cask rum tastes like. You get me? It's more about, here's the information to help you evaluate and appreciate this rum. That to me is the purpose of the information, is to help you evaluate the price and to help you with your appreciation of the rum. I don't want to see sort of laundry lists and everyone thinking that you can. So you need to be careful with that. I mean, and sometimes the reverse happens as well. When I say the reverse, let me explain. So I come out with limited editions, as you guys know, and you'll be amazed at how many people will write me and they will say, I'm coming to the distillery, can I buy a Criterion? I'm coming to the distillery, can I buy a 1998? I'm coming to the distillery. And I write in the back, I'm saying, they're all sold. And for me, it's a very interesting reflection of the fact that we have been selling things called limited and stuff like that. They're not really limited. So it's very amusing to me when things are truly limited, and then it's kind of almost like a shock. No, it's limited. It's gone. It's gone. I mean it. It's really gone. And I think some of that. Having said that, yes, we do know the allocation thing, and there is a risk with the allocation business that it's there to create a sort of false demand. I mean, I did get asked, for example, just recently, well, why did you only do 2,000 bottles of Criterion? And that was for the US. I said, well, of that particular rum at the time, that's all I had. It's as simple as that. If I wanted to make 4,000 bottles or 6,000, I would have had to have made a different rum. I would have had to bring in other components, or the same components but younger, or the same components are older. But that's what the outturn of the cask that made Criterion came up and added up to. That's it. So, I mean, this all sort of, I remember with going back to the first Value release, 2006. We did it for 2,400 bottles. And I remember it was quite a delay between 06 arriving in Italy and when it was released. And there was various reasons for that. Luca was doing some other different releases and he wanted to time them together. And so the 2006 did have some nice publicity before it was released. This is the Value for 2006. Including winning the Rum Trophy out of it. So he released it. I can't remember whatever day he released it, but he phoned me up, and he got to about 10 or 11 o'clock in Italy, and he phoned me up and he said, "It's gone. It's gone. It's gone in 2 hours or whatever." And we had no absolutely clue. I mean, we did 2,400 bottles because I did have more of that rum, but we thought I think I had 30 casks, and we emptied nine, and it added up to 2,400 bottles, and we thought 2,400 bottles was a lot, and it was gone in 2 hours. And believe me, we were as stunned as anyone. So there you go.
Funny. I know that we're going to go back a little bit, but Darren had a question about the different marks, so I wanted to make sure that he got his question in.
Yeah, so Richard, so you mentioned a lot of different things about the marks and stuff like that in the conversation that we had. I was just wondering if you have a particular profile that you look for each of the different marks, like Dorley's profile is, tasted this way versus Rum 66 or McCoy. Or
yeah, yes, each one is a blend, and yeah, I mean, R.L. Seale 10-year-old versus, Dorley's XO versus Dorley's 12. They're all different rums. And we're able to do different rums because we make, a mark is a type of rum, not a brand, just to kind of, you use mark in terms of a name. The historic, because as again, go back in time, rums where distillers didn't make brands. So distillers identified their individual output by marks. And that tradition has continued. So each when we say a blend, it's a sum of different marks, and you can see some different things published. I remember, I think Demerara published some stuff on what marks went into their blends and stuff like that. Our marks are not individually sold, so one reason why Demerara did that is because they would sell their individual marks. So the mark had an identity outside of them. Our marks are all internal. So each rum, yeah, is different. And that's really, I mean, there's two aspects to the job of blender. There's the easy one and there's the hard one. And I only have to do the easy one. So the hard one is making sure that Dorley's XO or that Dorley's 12 tastes, consistent. I do the distilling side, which is to make sure that the individual marks that the blender has are consistent. So I can make his life easy. On the blending side, I only do the special ones. So, and that's creating the rum. Well, creating the rum is dead easy. I mean, there's no, I know some people like to dwell on it a little bit, but to be perfectly honest with you, I could make a blend and, you could make a blend with the components, and 6 people in here might like one and 6 people might like the other. I mean, it's really more your own personal stamp. So if my blends are popular, it's only because maybe I have a very common taste. But I think people like to pretend that, a blend is sort of searching for the holy grail. There's no holy grail of blends. I might do a blend and you might prefer it having a little more of this, and another guy might prefer it had a little more of that. And there's no, so I always say I have the easy because I get to create the stuff. I don't have the hard work task of trying to keep it consistent. That's a much more difficult task for a blender.
I've heard like the Crown Royal guy can tell you, like, he makes each one taste the same, but then he can tell you if one bottle of Crown Royal was poured into the other. I'm like, how can you do it if they taste the same? I can't imagine.
Exactly. That's a totally different level of skill. Yeah, that's.
I think it's BS at that point.
That does sound a little suspicious, but it can be. But the thing about it is too, everything has to be so consistent, because you could literally have a one rum in 2 different glasses and they'll taste different. So, sometimes when I'm out there, someone will push a Foursquare rum in front of me and I'll know it's a Foursquare rum, but the head will be going through, well, which fucking one is it? Because, it's in a different glass and whatever, it's like, I'll narrowed it down, but fuck it. I mean,
you've done it to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, because everything tastes different. No, you put two things in 2 different glasses. You could put the same rum in 2 different glasses, and everyone will swear to you they're 2 different rums.
I know that that Jason, I don't know if you want to jump yourself off mute, Jason, about Europe versus United States.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The only question I was going to ask is obviously you've got a bunch of folks that are avid consumers, and once we've tasted everything that you release to the U.S., we typically look outside of the U.S. for other things. Can you share a little bit about your philosophy on what you release to the EU, versus what you release to the U.S.? Is there rhyme or reason to it? Are there similarities?
Yes. Yeah, there is some good reasons behind it, and it's not related to quality. I mean, if you prefer Nobillery to Plenipotensario, there's nothing wrong with you. You may very well. The logic behind the European is purely size. The European, if I have something that's very, very small, it goes the European route. So, for example, go back to 2006, the first one I did, the first Valier, 2,400 bottles. Because why? If you have something that's only 2,500 bottles, you're going to go through TTB, state registrations. You're going to go through all that shit. And what people don't realize, this is the other aspect we don't realize, which is also why it goes to Europe. Let me explain. When you hear the Valier is Europe, it's not Europe. The Valier goes to Italy and France. That's it. That's where it goes. What happens is that in another EU country, you can go and import from France or Italy. So if you're Belgium, you can go and buy stock from my French importer. If you are UK, you can go and buy stock. You can't do that in the US, right? So you don't get the European because you can't just call up, Valier in Italy or LM&V in Paris and say, ship me 50 bottles. So yeah, that's why you don't get. So even though you hear, the Valier is available in England or the Valier is available in Belgium or wherever, that's because an enterprising importer calls up France and says, send me 100 bottles, send me 50 bottles, send me 200 bottles. And of course, some Americans do this, where they call up our good friend Richard Blesgraaf in Holland and say, ship me a bottle. And that's one way to get, and you're actually literally doing it more or less, Eric. So I think that's one confusion. It's actually not Europe versus USA. It's Italy and France versus the rest of Europe.
Okay.
And it's purely size. It's purely and utterly size. And it may work in your favor. I mean, people to this day rave over things like Criterion. Criterion was was quite small. It was 4,000 bottles, so we did split it. So some of the ECS are small. I mean, Nobillery is 12,000 bottles, split 6 and 6. But the values tend to be very small. The biggest value is 6,000 bottles. So yeah, so the next value release I have planned again is going to be probably a little under 6,000 bottles. So will the US get it? No, because guess what? I'm going to go 6,000 bottles. I sent it to Italy and France. It's gone, sold out in an hour. I didn't have to do TTB. I didn't have to do state registration. I didn't do none of that shit. So guess what?
Jay will do the TTB work for you. I promise. I volunteer him.
Just Florida. That's all. I don't care about the rest of the states.
Too small for Europe. Perfect for Florida. Jay does the TTB work. Done.
Agreed, and I'll drink it all.
So that's it. That's the rhyme or reason behind it. I mean, you could argue that also a little bit subconsciously in the back of my mind might be, okay, I think this might be more European palate. So when if you look at Plenipotensario versus Nobillery, there might be a little bit of a psychology going on there as well, going, this might work a little better in Europe. And Nobillery might, Nobillery is both, but there's a little psychology thinking to myself, wait till those guys get their hands on Nobillery, they're just going to love it, when I'm thinking kind of my more American audience.
So you like to have fun, experiment. What's the new still? What's the plan, or what do you expect the outcome to be?
The new pot still?
Yes.
So the new pot still, no, I don't really like the experiment at all. I'm very boring. People think I do a lot of experimentation. I don't. I make it look like it is. So for example, if you take my cast, people go, oh, you do a lot of experimenting with cast. No, actually, name me one cask that I've ever bought that's high risk. Okay, maybe the Zin. Okay, that was my experiment. But I'm literally buying Madeiras and sherries. I'm buying some of the best bloody casks in the world. There's nothing very, very brave about that. The only difference is that, you know, being able to afford them. So, I mean, one of the sources I buy from casks, that I buy casks from, last couple of years, I haven't released anything from them. I get some casks from Chile, from a winery in Chile. Why? Because that winery in Chile is the best, one of the best wineries in the entire planet. Montes.
Which winery?
So guess what Montes can do? Montes can go over to France and buy the creme de la creme of casks. And then they get the casks out into Chile and they use them for the wines. And then at some certain point in time, they decide that casks don't work for them anymore. And there's not really a lot of people buying up these casks. So, because there's not a lot of spirit making there. So I get my hands in a wonderful roundabout way in some creme de la creme French oak casks. So there you go. It's about the cask. It's not about the wine. So yeah, that's the thing. I don't like to think so much experimental, and the pot still. So the Foursquare has one pot still. We're about to have a second pot still. And the second pot still is literally a manifestation of everything we've learned on the first pot still. So the first pot still over the years has been modified and tinkered and modified. And the second pot still has all of the mods in from the outset. And in one particular part, and this is where I will talk about innovation, because for me, when we talk about innovation in the spirits world, it's usually not innovation, it's just marketing gobbledygook. Because innovation is really, really hard, and it's really at the background. And I'll give you one perfect example of that. Is in our pot still, we use what we call some nano copper services. So these copper services were developed in Italy with research work done at University of Siena, with a slight tiny input from Foursquare distillery. And so the manifestation of that work was the development of these copper services. And copper is there for catalyzing effect. So if you can have a copper surface that basically has an increased catalyzing effect, it's obviously a better copper to use. So, you know, when we make stills, we make them big and all these bubbles, and it's all about getting copper surface. So if we can do that, it's better. So we've been using nano copper since 2016 in the pot still. So none of the ECS, you've seen the benefit of that. The one area where you've seen it is some of the pots still going into Probitas. And so that's been pretty well received. So I guess the nano copper is working. But the beauty of the new pot still is we've been able to design it from the ground up with using bits and pieces of nano copper. And we've been able to do, as they say, all of the stuff we've learned. And instead of modifying, we've built it in. So the new pot still is going to make what the old pot still makes. But we do think we're going to have some ability to do to basically just keep pushing the envelope on quality.
So I'm gonna wrap up, Richard, with the last question, which I'm sure everyone wants to hear. What can you tell us about what's coming next? What can we expect down the line?
Well, the announcement on the successor to Sagacity is imminent, because Sagacity's done. So this year you've had Nobility, which is well, it's all gone from me and Porter. I mean, still out there. 08's now hitting the market, and the replacement Sagacity. I say this year, but one of the things we're trying to get away from is people thinking in terms of annual. It's not about annual. It's simply about when they. Yeah, so Sagacity's gone. I mean, when I say it's gone, it's probably still on lots of shelves and stuff. But I mean, my distributor or my importer doesn't have any. So, you know, so right now we're working very hard on getting the successor to Sagacity.
Is it called imminent?
Sorry?
Is it called imminent?
No, it is not called imminent. But it will be named imminently. And it has some casks in it that were previously popular in the ECS series.
I've got to ask one more question. Is like you're the fourth generation. Is your son working? Does he have a love of rum? I know your daughter is in the medical field.
Yeah, so my son, he does work in the industry, but he actually works with Valier in Italy. So he's working on the sales and marketing side.
Not a bad place to intern.
He enjoys telling his father that all the marketing stuff we're doing wrong.
If he wants to do a rotation in the U.S., I'm sure somebody here will bring him over.
Yeah, I imagine he'll do a stint at time. So he's basically getting experience in the industry, and he's getting on the sales side. So that's really what we need. You know, because we're really, you know, we're obviously very green when we come out. I mean, we've been exporting for a while now, but we're still, you know, we're still very green. So him learning about the marketing is kind of a missing piece in the.
All right. So can we have Gayle back for another segment since we didn't get any questions for her? So I think we should invite her back.
Well, that's part of your fault if you didn't ask the questions. Yes, you can have her back on your own. That's perfectly fine.
I would love to come back and chat on the things that are in my range, because a lot of that, I mean, I do learn a lot from Richard and I know a lot about rum, but I'm more on the promotion but I like talking to people too. So
That was just a very fast hour and a half. And I feel like there's a lot more to cover. And
we love it. If you're willing, Gayle, we'll definitely set up another call so we can chat with you more.
yeah, definitely. I'd be glad to come along.
But Richard's not invited because then we want to make sure we keep it to you.
He'll be sitting on the.
Very good plan.
This is what happened with our smaller call with Ian, where Gayle was chatting and then Richard was behind. We didn't know he was on the couch next to her, and then over the call. Right, that's the way it goes.
I was very bummed to miss that one.
Thank you, Richard and Gayle, so much for joining us. We're of course thrilled, and we could listen to you all night. But I know that some people have to go make dinner and have to walk the little cute dogs and all those things. Thank you so much, and we'll definitely do it again soon. So we appreciate you guys taking time out of your evening to spend with us here in Florida.
No worries.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Guys.
We'll talk soon, guys. Have a good one.